Welcome back, everybody, to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pascal Lotta, and I am joined today again by my friend and colleague, Eugene Doyle, the host of solidarity.co.nz. Eugene, welcome back.
Hey, great to be back, Pascal.
Great having you. And we want to actually discuss this very sad topic of the Gaza genocide and the thing that happened recently, that we've had the Sumud Flotilla trying to go and reach Gaza, but then they were kidnapped on the high sea right outside of Greece. And all of these, I think it was about 170 activists. But you will give me the details now. They were taken away and beaten and whatnot, and all of this done by Israel in international waters, far away from Israel or Gaza. And you wrote several articles about this, and I just want to say this at the beginning. Everybody, Eugene has this wonderful page on which you can find this on NZ. And you wrote several articles. The latest one coming out today: did the New Zealand Prime Minister just commit treason by ignoring the terrorist attack on his own citizens? There were New Zealand citizens on there, and you were, of course, also a New Zealand citizen. Can you give us the rundown of what actually occurred and how this is now going down, and your perspective on it?
Sure. Well, okay, just so the global Sumud Flotilla is an international movement, and there's there's about at least 60 countries represented on it, and over 60 vessels. And they what they're trying to do, absolute heroes of our time. They're sailing to Gaza to open a humanitarian corridor to bring aid and support to the besieged and Palestinian people who are undergoing this terrible genocide. So that was the mission. And they were heading towards Gaza. They knew that the Israelis at some point would intercept them, but they were really shocked when 1,000 kilometers out in international waters, and I'd encourage people to look at things like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, etc. It was an absolute act of piracy. You had this major assault on this peace flotilla. So you had about 4 warships, a prison ship, planes, drones, and all these Israeli stormtroopers who raided the ships on the night of the 29th of April. And over 20 of the ships were actually intercepted and boarded, and others got away. But what actually happened was quite extraordinary. Where they stormed aboard. They took the the activists off the ships, put them on a prison ship, and for that one, and then shockingly, what they did was they sabotaged the ships. So the police flotilla ships that they got a hold of. So they slashed sails, they cut fuel lines, they smashed up all the navigation equipment and the comms equipment, stole a whole bunch of stuff, as the Israelis always do, and then they took these activists who were on board the prison ship, which was they had 4 shipping containers that they used as a prison, but they had so many prisoners that they actually put about a third of them on the deck. And then over the next 3 days, dozens of them had the hell beaten out of them. And if you look at the images on my site, so some of these beatings were, really very, very savage. That guy there, Jay O'Connor, so he's a New Zealander. And he was, as you can see, he was kicked in the head. He was savagely kicked in the ribs and the kidneys and all of this. This was an absolute terrorist attack. And what I thought was interesting was that our Prime Minister, that's that bald chap on the right there, Christopher Luxon, actually did nothing about it. It was quite extraordinary. You have the most serious state terrorist attack on New Zealand citizens since the 1985 French bombing of the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbour. And our Prime Minister does absolutely nothing. Our government, these New Zealand citizens, when they were dumped onto Crete after the Israelis had finished with them, the New Zealand government told them they had to fend for themselves. All the government did was they put out a press release saying the safety of New Zealand is of paramount importance. But having spoken to the Sumud activists themselves, the government did nothing. These people arrived. Some of them had barely any clothes because they've been ripped out of their beds at night. They didn't have money. They didn't have phones. And if it wasn't for the kindness of strangers, they would have been in an even worse state because our government abandoned them. And I just thought that in itself is just such an incredible story, because you think, how can this be?
It is. Eugene, like I'm also so glad that you're covering this so closely, because it shows how the genocide actually works. We are led to believe that the genocide is the work of Israel and maybe, of Mr. Netanyahu, 2, 3 really bad and evil men, right? And if it wasn't for them, then we would have a paradise on earth. No, no. The genocide is a deliberate civilizational project of what we call the collective West or the political West, and it works by all of our governments being in cahoots with the people who pull the trigger. But you give them a trigger, you give them the weapons, you get them everything, you give them the political support, and when somebody tries to do something about it, you collectively make sure it never happens. And the Sumud Flotilla is, of course, a citizen initiative, a non-violent citizen initiative. And we now see how all the way to New Zealand, the New Zealand government is giving its thumbs up to this being dismantled by silence on the one hand, and I just cannot imagine. I cannot imagine that a foreign service of a Western country would not by default intervene. They would try to give consular help, because that's the whole point. Like the consulate, the New Zealand consulate, and diplomatic, the embassy in Athens, in where this happens, should of course be highly alarmed and try to immediately start doing something. If they don't, I can only imagine that there was the word was out not to do that, because that is my job.
You're absolutely right, because the Sumud Flotilla, when they were intercepted, were just outside Greek territorial waters, so they're in international waters. They put out an SOS to the Greek Navy, who ignored them. So it was very clear that the Greeks, who have this terrible government, were coordinating with the Israelis. And in fact, when the Israelis transferred the Sumud people to Greek ships to bring them to Crete, the Greek Navy treated them like criminals. There were guns trained on them. They were put on buses and weren't allowed to get off the buses. There were people who needed to be urgently taken to hospital because of the terrible beatings they had received. And it all happened incredibly slowly. And if it wasn't for the help of activists, Greek activists on the island of Crete, it would have been far worse. So yes, you're entirely right, Pascal, that genocide is a collective effort of Western countries, and to my enormous shame, my country is one of them.
Hey, very brief intermission, because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing, not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below. And now back to the video. How is this now developing, actually? I mean, these the last two, I think, that were actually then kidnapped to Israel, right? They were brought illegally to Israel, where they then were put on some form of show trial, and the majority of people were put on a march of shame in Greece, where Israel somehow managed to tell the Greek authorities to put shame on them and whatnot, and to mistreat them as you just described. But then two of them, the two leaders, they were kidnapped to Israel itself. Where do we stand right now? Where the individuals who took part in the Sumud Flotilla, how are they doing?
Right. Well, fortunately, the two who were kidnapped and taken to Israel have now been released. So that's one good piece of news. Hey, and I must say, in contrast to the woeful, shameful treatment our people received at the hands of the New Zealand government, at least the Turkish government put on an aircraft, had food, clothing, medical assistance, counseling support for these people who had been tortured and subjected to horrible things. Like, I'll give you an example of what the Israelis did. They did things like, for the people on the deck, and the nights were cold, they flooded the decks with salt water so that the people couldn't sleep at night. And they were inside these containers, shipping containers. They were letting off these flash bangs, and they were getting people to line up and putting them in stress positions. And then they'd grab someone and beat the hell out of them. This is the Israeli army, this disgusting Israeli occupation force. And these, our leaders tell us, are our friends and allies.
Obviously not. And what we are seeing here is also how Western governments are now using the forces that had been unleashed already on migrants, right? How you then treat your own people, European citizens, and New Zealand citizens and Australians, and not that it makes a difference, and everybody should of course be treated with dignity and equally, and whether they're Europeans or not, whether they are not North Africans or not, whether they're Palestinians or not. But you just see how now we are getting to the point where this empire of genocide is starting to use the weapons of genocide against its own people, and the methods are slowly being turned inward. And this is clearly an escalation of what happened last time, half a year ago, I want to say, or almost a year ago, when the last Sumud Flotilla tried to reach Gaza. They intercepted them on the high sea, way closer to Gaza, and they did a similar. They didn't do a thing as horrible as that. Actually, last time when they intercepted, they tried to broadcast everything on TV, saying like, "Oh, look, we are giving Greta Thunberg a sandwich. This is, because we're the IDF, we are the good guys. We're giving people sandwich," and they called it the selfie flotilla or whatnot. And this time they apparently changed the strategy to savagery, right? They short of executing people on the spot, but to savagery and beating. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, and look, you raised a point just before about people should be treated with respect regardless of their religion, skin color, whatever.
Yeah.
And what the Sumud Flotilla people, particularly the New Zealanders who I spoke to, really emphasized that what they went through was really horrible, but it is nothing compared to what the Palestinian people have to go through, and particularly the thousands. And I've done a number of stories on the Israeli prison system, and there's wonderful organizations like B'Tselem in Israel who have covered this, with reports like Welcome to Hell, the network of Israeli torture camps throughout Israel. So the Sumud people are fully aware that what they went through is small compared to the suffering of the prisoners, and you may as well call them hostages, inside the Israeli prison system. Yes, and I think one of the things that really got me was the fact that, and I think it's useful to talk about our citizens, so it helps people focus their minds that they've had it almost normalized, this mistreatment of the Palestinian people. And as you said, it's quite interesting when it starts coming, when our citizens start to be treated in that way. And I think the Prime Minister of New Zealand and other leaders like Anthony Albanese of Australia has done something very dangerous by quietly ignoring the mistreatment of his own citizens, because it means that these heroic individuals on the Sumud Flotilla, when they set out again, as they will, You know, they are going to stand up to fascism. They are going to continue their voyage. And the actions of the Australian Prime Minister, the New Zealand Prime Minister, and these other countries that stood silent while their citizens were abused, that puts these people in further danger, perhaps greater danger, because the Israelis will have got the message that they can act with impunity.
Yeah, but again, it's like I don't think anyone needs to send that message to Israel. I mean, they just do it. They make it. I cannot imagine that Israel does this without coordinating with the Greeks, without coordinating with the who else is there with Cyprus. There must be information that these ships go there and then do this. And again, they offloaded these people to Greece, right? There is information within the EU, and the EU has its common the patrols, right, against
Mm.
immigrants, right, from North Africa, and they patrol the sea. This was done with the knowledge and with the coordination of these coast guards, of the EU kind of Schengen room coast guard. I don't know actually what the name of that institution is, but otherwise you cannot just have like a 3 or 4 military boats and a prison ship just float in there. I mean, just for 1 second, if Iran tried to just have like 4 military boats go into the Mediterranean, I mean, what would happen? Of course, they know about this. Of course, NATO and the people who control this maritime space had to be informed about it. So, what we now know for sure, 100%, is that the assault on the Sumud Flotilla is a checkbox, is an okay with the Europeans. They said like, go for it, take them out. Um, it's really really horrible, because again, it's like, take out our own citizens, go
Yeah,
get them.
and
And by the way, when they're back, we will make sure that they suffer a little bit longer, because the little kids need to learn, naughty little kids need to learn who's boss sits in Tel Aviv, right?
I think these leaders are doing something extremely dangerous, because what they're doing is they're kind of suggesting there's two tiers of citizens.
Yep.
There's one level who are the docile, content, non-politically engaged citizens, or there's those who support the government over Israel and the attack on Iran and all these things. And then if you're a citizen who has a different view, who's a vociferous critic, you suddenly lose your rights of citizenship, because to be a citizen of a state is the duty of a leader of a state. First and foremost, is to protect the citizens, and they most certainly need, and under international law and long convention, they must be protected from being molested by foreign states. That's the first duty. Hey, now I thought of you today, Pascal, because I quoted. Now I'm going to mangle his name, Emmerich Vartel, "The Law of Nations." Have you come across that?
Emmerich Vattel, yeah, one of the most famous Swiss philosophers of
Yeah,
the past.
the
But yeah,
Law of Nations. Hey, now I'll just give you a short quote from him, because I came across it the other day and I thought it was highly appropriate. So, quote: Whoever uses a citizen ill indirectly offends the state, which is bound to protect the citizen, and the sovereign should avenge his wrongs, punish the aggressor, and if possible, oblige him to make full reparations, since otherwise the citizen would not obtain the great end of the civil association, which is safety. That's brilliant. That's
yeah,
1758.
it's it's a social contract idea. I mean, by being a citizen of a state and by adhering to its laws and paying its taxes, you then get the right to be protected by the state from other people within your state, but also outside the state. So the social contract here was broken by our governments that did not defend our compatriots, because that's what they're there for. That's their job, and if they don't do that, well, you set yourself up actually for quite something in the future.
That is a very good point, because I think that's right. You break a bond between the citizen and the state. And that's not a very good idea in the long term. It's not a very good long term strategy, I would have said. I mean, even people like Ronald Reagan, for God's sake, it was very clear that the first duty of the leader is to protect the citizens. And how on earth people like, well, I think Luxon's problem is he's a joker who's sort of, he was the chief executive of an airline company, and he keeps on referring to himself as a chief executive or a CEO. I think the Joker doesn't know much about politics, and he certainly doesn't know much about what you were just talking about, which is political philosophy and people like Thomas Hobbes and all of that.
You're talking about your PM, the little bold chap who's like not bold at all, who's like quite a coward by not protecting his people, you mean?
Yeah, and look, hey, I want to do a little comparison, which I did in the article. I think it's really important. So if you compare that shameful display by the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and also might I say, our mainstream media, all the major outlets, they covered it sort of very briefly, very quickly. But like New Zealand's a fairly quiet place. The big story might be some pop singer broke her ankle, or Mrs. McGillicuddy's cat got killed, or something like that. So actually having warships surround your citizens and beating the hell out of them and taking hostages, it's really a big story, and yet they treated it as a minor story, which they quickly moved on from. So I think that tells you about who owns our media today in New Zealand and other countries. Now, let's do a comparison. Because I think the most appropriate comparison is with, for a New Zealander, is the French terrorist attack, the state terrorist attack on the Rainbow Warrior, the Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior, which was blown up in Auckland Harbour in 1985. And one of the members, Fernando Pereira, was killed. He was on board. Others, including a good friend of mine, were out for dinner that night, having just come down. Had just come down from Rongelap. They had evacuated the victims of U.S. atomic testing off Rongelap. And they were then going to head up into French Polynesia to protest the French nuclear testing up there, but the ship was blown up. Now, you compare it. When that event happened, the entire political class of New Zealand, the entire media, the entire population flew into a frenzy and stayed in a frenzy for months. We tracked, collectively, our police, our Secret Service, etc., under instruction of our Prime Minister, David Lange. They pursued these terrorists, and they discovered, because initially they didn't know who did it, and then they found out that it was state terrorism. It was the French government. It was the Direction Générale de Sécurité Extérieure, the CIA of France, who were behind this. And eventually, it took a long time to find this out. It actually was signed off by none other than the president of France, François Mitterrand.
Wow.
And but that took a long time to get to that one. But I mean, gosh, what a contrast! We ran the French to ground on that one. We forced high officials, including the Minister of Defense and the head of the DGSE, this CIA, French CIA. They were forced to step down. We captured two of these spies, Alain Maffat and Dominique Prieur. They went to jail in New Zealand. And then, under the terms of an agreement sorted out between the New Zealand government and the French government, the French had to pay for a new ship for Greenpeace. The two spies got 10 years imprisonment sentences, 10 years imprisonment, and those officials had to step down. So that was the action of a prime minister and government. And the whole society, media, everyone was right behind it. It was a cause célèbre. Now you contrast that to Christopher Luxon, who sort of scratches his chrome dome and looks the other way and pretends there's nothing to see here, folks. And the New Zealand media today, the shameful, empty-headed New Zealand media that wants to tell us about cat stories and things like that, but won't actually seriously address the fact that the New Zealanders had suffered the most significant terrorist attack since the Rainbow Warrior bombing. And my God, what has happened to my country?
So the comparison is very, very important because it tells us where the journey went for New Zealand, right? From actually having an independent foreign policy and having sovereignty, and actually understanding that when somebody attacks your activists, they attack yourself, they attack the state, and that's what needs to stop. And you need to actually ask for compensation and whatnot, not ask but demand. And now in 2026 we're at a completely different place, aren't we? We are at the point where Israel can just implement its foreign policy priorities on all and any citizens in the world, wherever they are on the high sea. The next thing that's going to start is going to be like Israelis attacking activists abroad. They're going to go and start going after these people on land, because by now they can do it offshore of any other nation, right? So why not just have Israeli agents go into the houses of people somewhere in Germany, New Zealand, in Australia, and just beat the hell out of them, or kidnap them, or kill them there? I mean, that's the natural next step of the progression. And apparently our governments are fine with that. They're okay with that. No. The Israelis, they're special. If their forces go somewhere, if they abduct somebody, it must be legal. The United States, if they abduct the president of another country, it must be fine according to our media. Must be a drug dealer, right? So we are completely in a vacuum at the moment that, to my knowledge, is uncomparable with any time of the last 200 years when it comes to how the Europeans thought of their sovereignty.
I think it's a tragedy because I'm actually, over the last few years, I've spent quite a bit of time, I'm sure you have too, Pascal, reading parts of the United Nations Charter, which is a pretty fine document.
It is a
And the tragedy, people often criticize the United Nations, but I think the prime problem with the United Nations is that countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, France, Britain, etc., have absolutely trampled over the United Nations Charter and have refused to uphold it. And now they're even refusing to uphold rights for their own citizens. And I think that's really tragic. I wanted to say one other thing, just about the Rainbow Warrior period that I think is quite important. You talked about independence just then, and one of the upshots of the Rainbow Warrior event was, it was like the shot of adrenaline into the New Zealand psyche, that we suddenly realized that our friends, the French, were not our friends. And we also learned, by the way, this is an incredible fact. A lot of people still don't know this. The Australian government, our dearest neighbours, our close buddies across the Tasman, the Australians helped about I think it was 4 or 5 of the terrorists, the French terrorists, they helped them to escape. That they had fled on a yacht to Norfolk Island. The New Zealanders had tracked them there, and the Aussies refused to grab them. So they were able to sail off. They were met by a French submarine in the middle of the Pacific. They boarded the submarine and sank their ship, so they got away thanks to the Australians. And I must say that our other dear buddies, the Americans and the British, our closest allies after the Australians, they said not a word, not boo, about what was done to New Zealand, and they in no way criticised the French. So New Zealanders took that message on board at the time, and within 2 years, we had signed the Nuclear Free Zone Act. New Zealand still to this day has a wonderful piece of nuclear-free legislation that was from 1987. And then the cherry on the top was the Americans and the Australians booted us out of the military alliance, ANZUS, Australia, New Zealand, US military alliance, and we just said, well, I was going to say a word I shouldn't have said, but we were quite happy, many of us, to see the back end of that, and it really helped New Zealanders think about developing a more neutral position, a more independent position, a foreign policy that was based on humanitarian ideals and not militaristic alliances. And unfortunately, 41 years later, we find ourselves having drifted back into these very unhealthy arrangements. But I do know there is a movement, there is a real movement in New Zealand that is contesting all of this and is pushing to get us back into a defense policy setting that is independent, that is friends of all, enemies of none, and ensure we have a foreign policy that is more genuinely independent.
I would hope that actually a good number of the New Zealand and Australian and European citizenry actually finally gets the point that this is not in their interest. That if somebody is able to do this to you on the high sea, I mean, just imagine for a second if this had been Somali pirates who boarded them and then beat the hell out of people. If it was Somali pirates, this would be all over the news. Like everybody would be up in arms, and we would probably be at war with Somalia by now. If it was Somali pirates, right? Because the outrage would be tremendous. But the fact that it is white Israelis, settler colonial European people who do this to others, then it's fine. And a government that doesn't protect you from this and that doesn't talk about this, and none of the Europeans did. I don't know if the Spanish government did something. I think the
Spanish were magnificent. No, Pedro said
Pedro is like right now he's doing so much actually, Mr. Sanchez, that it's great to see. But apart from them, nobody speaks about it. It's insane. And if your government doesn't protect you from this, then you don't really have a government, actually.
Yeah, I'd encourage people to look up Pedro Sanchez. Spain will always protect its citizens. So he gave a fantastic speech about the Sumud Flotilla and that Spain was not gonna accept this, and it was such an incredible contrast to the sniveling cowardice of my own prime minister.
So do you think it's going to be a wake-up call? I mean, of course, yes, the media is now trying to bury this and to say like, oh, it's a non-event, some weird kind of hippies that were trying to breach Israeli law and support terrorism. Does that work now in the population in New Zealand?
I think it does to a degree, but there are some positive signs. The Ipsos, who are a big international polling agency, they did a global survey of attitudes towards the US-Israeli attack on Iran. And New Zealand came out as one of the countries who was most opposed to any military interventions against Iran. And that was very pleasing. I think partly that might have been calculation by New Zealanders because we live at the end, we're at the very bottom of the South Pacific, we're at the end of, figuratively speaking, the longest oil pipeline in the world. So we're terribly vulnerable to energy shocks. And I think the fact that more and more ordinary people, who are normally detached, who don't pay much attention to things like genocides and things that happen far away, unfortunately, a great many people are like that. But the oil shock has one benefit, that it's slowly making geopolitics a kitchen table issue. It's actually making ordinary people go, oh man, hey, my petrol's getting more expensive, and they're even talking about maybe are we going to have diesel to run our farm tractors and all of this. And so the energy shock and the Trump's war on Iran, the Netanyahu's war on Iran, is actually, and I've really noticed it. I know quite a lot of just ordinary folks who aren't terribly interested in geopolitics who are suddenly asking me questions and asking my opinions about things. And, I think if there's one good thing that's happened through all of that, that's actually starting to get people to engage more with these great issues of our time. It shouldn't just be left to the likes of you, me, and the Sumud activists.
No, but that's the only thing that can actually change it, right? If there's a mass, don't want to call it awakening, but a mass awareness that this can't continue. I mean, this is not only horrible for the people who are being genocided. This is going to be more and more horrible for everybody involved. And when it actually starts at the dinner table, when people realize, oh, it might be me next, this thing about speaking out for the other, because it's not just for them, it's also for to protect yourself down the line. And we are seeing this now, this escalation. And Israel, of course, has a long history of doing this kind of high sea piracy. When was it, in 2006 or 7, when they killed 5 or 6 activists on a Turkish ship that was trying to deliver an aid, and they just did that and they got away with it. And they even had the audacity to call out the Turkish government for not doing anything against it. And at least Turkey at that time at least had the guts to stand up for itself and to make a big fuss about it. And it was a huge thing. But the Israelis, they just do that. They cement in stone that they are allowed to do anything, anywhere, anytime. And if anyone says this is not right, then they accuse them of being Nazis and anti-Semites.
But that's entirely right, Pascal. But the other thing that's slightly depressing about all of this is you have countries like Germany. My God, the terrible beatings I've seen the German police lay down on German citizens. You go to England, where they have now arrested, I think it's something like 3,000 Palestine Action protesters who are holding cardboard signs. You're turning under the Terrorism Act. They're arresting sort of, decent, elderly British people, the absolute soul of dignity and good human nature, and they're arresting them under the Terrorism Act. So our own societies risk really, it's like Zionism has become a bit of a cancer inside a lot of Western societies. And until we actually wake up to this and actually realize that we are on the wrong side of history here, rather spectacularly. Like I know you've interviewed Chaz Freeman, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, and I was quite surprised the other day when I heard him say that the Israelis are really exhibiting all the characteristics of the German Nazis in the Second World War, which is, I know that just saying that would drive your average Israeli Zionist apoplectic. But unfortunately, if you don't want to be called a Nazi, don't behave like one. And I'm shocked at what's happened to Israeli society. And I know some Israelis, really decent, wonderful people who are involved in the same struggle as I am. And there's tremendous people doing wonderful work in Israel, but unfortunately, they're precious few these days. You're watching a society really that has descended into darkness, and for some a very odd reason, our government seems to want to go along for the ride.
Well, I mean, look, they are now learning from the Zionists, from Israel, how to deal with opposition, right? You deal with them by killing them, imprisoning them, torturing them, raping them, abusing them, and in the end, genociding them, right? And that is a way of dealing with opposition. And actually, our governments are now kind of looking at that apparently and say like, you know, maybe that's the way to go, instead of actually trying to do something about the human rights abuses that the activists call out. Well, let's abuse the human rights of the activists until they stop it. And if they don't stop, well, Israel figured out how to let people rot to death in concentration camps. And it cannot be a Nazi method if it is Israel that did it, right? Because they suffered from the Nazis. Therefore, they will be the eternal victims. So if we are on the side of the eternal victims, we ourselves are the victims. So we just defend ourselves from those grotesque activists who want human rights for everybody. I am really thinking that this is where the journey is going for some of these folks in Europe, that they are thinking now not about Zionism in Israel as something that is a fascist dictatorship or is a fascist society, but as something to emulate. And we see how some of the rules and regulations are being adjusted in order to be able to crack down on this kind of dissent, especially in the UK. It's quite interesting that it's coming from there again, and in Germany, of course. So really, like the way that these countries now let their activists be mistreated, and abused by Israel should be actually the loudest of all alarm bells to anyone in these countries to say, like, we are not safe from our governments anymore.
Yes, I hope we move back towards the rule of law. We have political leaders who are endlessly banging on about the rules-based international order, but I suspect they've read a lot less of these things than I have, because they constantly trample on them. And I think we'll all be better off if we really do return to rules-based systems where we really do respect, for example, sort of the territorial sovereignty of nations. Like the sovereign state of Iran, whether you like their government or don't like their government, is a sovereign state, and its territorial integrity should be respected. And that's part of the United Nations Charter. The non-interference in the internal affairs of nations, terribly important, but that's constantly being trampled on. And what you end up with is the extraordinary situation we're in, where the Iranians are giving us a bit of a lesson in the laws of international conduct. And I have to say, while this imperialist war against Iran is being waged by the United States of America and Israel, and thank God my own government, they wanted to, our leader apparently wanted to go all in with the Americans and the Israelis, but got stymied by his Minister of Foreign Affairs. But whilst that war's going on, I thoroughly support the Iranians' right to resistance and hope it provides a salutary lesson to the Americans, the Israelis, but also, as we were just talking about, all these Western countries that seem to have sadly lost their way.
Yeah, no, I mean, the ones who are standing up at the moment for international law, which is not the same as the rules-based international order, but the proper international law, which is the rules that are supposed to govern all states and is above them and not a tool for them. That part is actually being held up right now by the Iranians, by the Chinese, by the Russians, because they are still rational to the sense that they actually try to build security structures and try to build something that actually works for the entire globe. Whereas the Western idea is, of course, that of Israel: total domination and, if necessary, extermination in order to get your way. So that's why also, today China came out with a proposal for a peace proposal, right, that the Iranians already said yes to. And it's 4 points, and all 4 points are basically, if you boil them down, it's like, let's keep to international law. And the Iranians said yes to that, because if you do that, then Iran gets the benefits under the NPT, including uranium enrichment and use for civilian purposes. You get, of course, the blockade lifted. You get the illegal sanctions lifted, or all of the sanctions that are not from the UN. That would already be a super huge deal. I mean, all of that would be gone if we kept to the actual rules of the United Nations, and that brings us back to the Charter. And that's what the other side at the moment wants to uphold. It is really only the entire political West, and at its helm, of course, the United States and Israel, that are trying to create a completely different set of rules, which is like, we tell you what to do, and if you oppose it, then we kill you. And they
Yeah.
are just trying to create these examples here now.
Yes. Hey, and I have to say, one of the things too about international law, your compatriot, Mr. Vartel, who I quoted before, he used reference to the fact that you need to get reparations. If there's damage done, you need reparations. So the Iranians have every right to insist on hundreds of billions of dollars of reparation for this crime of crime, a war of aggression. And can I just say, Pascal, that I think given that the Israelis and Americans are highly unlikely to pull out the checkbook and pay reparations, I think this business of the Ir Iranians putting a small transit charge, 1% or something like this, on traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is an excellent mechanism for the Iranians to actually get what they absolutely deserve, which is reparations for these crimes. And hey, just one other thing I want to say. I just because I've been giving my government a good slapping and the West a good slapping, and all of that. I want to sing the praise of these wonderful activists.
Yeah.
They're the best of us. They are just such great people, and I've had such an enriching experience. I've been talking to people in Turkey and in Greece and here in New Zealand who are part of the Sumud Flotilla. And I'll just say a couple of their names because they're such wonderful people. Hahona Ormsby, Julian Blondell, Jay O'Connor, Samuel Leeson, Musa Tahir, Sean Jansen, Rana Hamida, and I've got mates like Bianca Ransom and all sorts. So I'll go on and on. Such great people involved in such a great struggle, and they're people that give us real hope. They give us hope that things can be better. We can turn these things around, and people can, because these guys they're all such lovely people. They're all such good people. They're a model of how to behave as a human being, and their courage to stand up for humanity. I just think it's absolutely wonderful. So in a way, that's the most important thing I'd like to say.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a very good end point, just also as a ray of hope, that there are people like those who try to actually do something, and who have the guts to actually risk their lives for the others. And the genocide is still going on as we speak. Israel is still killing tens, if not hundreds, of people every week in Gaza and Lebanon and the West Bank. I mean, the level of destruction and despair that are currently being sown over there is horrible. But that there are people in the collective West that try to oppose this is also opposing their own system, right? Because again, our countries are actively helping to implement the genocide. It wouldn't work without the international support of it. It's a collective endeavor, and so the movement against it also must be a collective endeavor. And it's great coverage, by the way, again, Eugene, for anyone who wants to go and see. Like, they should subscribe to you on solidarity.nz, right? I mean, you can sign up here for your news, for your mail distribution, right?
Cool. Yeah, that'd be much appreciated. No, yeah, solidarity.co.nz, and free Marwan Barghouti.
Free Marwan Barghouti, and free everybody under who's suffering from this oppressive regime. Eugene Doyle, thank you so much for your time today.